Formula 1 in the 1950s is almost a completely different sport to what it is today. Most modern F1 tracks are meticulously designed to facilitate the best racing possible, while also providing plenty of overtaking opportunities. Some tracks do this incredibly well, and some, well, don't do it at all, but still what I'm trying to say is that all modern F1 tracks are built to be incredibly precise and intricate. I bring this up because in the 1950s, track design was much simpler, to put it nicely, and it's astounding how far F1 has come. Back in the 50s, creating an F1 venue would consist of finding some public roads in the middle of nowhere, slapping up some hay bales, and job done, you've got a Grand Prix. This led to some of the most ridiculous yet legendary racetracks in the history of motorsport. These circuits like Reims, Classic Spa and Avis were naturally also incredibly dangerous. But when it comes to danger, I think one circuit stood above the rest, even at a time where deaths were common and the very idea of safety would get you laughed at. Today I'm talking about the infamous Pescara circuit that ran just one Formula 1 race, being the 1957 Pescara Grand Prix. So why was this circuit in particular so dangerous, especially when comparing it to the other crazy circuits of the time? Well, for a start, the circuit was quite long, and by quite long, I mean it is the longest track ever used in F1's history, and almost certainly will never be topped. To put it into comparison, the shortest track currently in F1, Monaco, is just about 2.1 miles long, and the longest right now, Spa-Francorchamps, is 4.4 miles long. Pescara, on the other hand, was a massive 16 miles long. The circuit was deemed so daunting and dangerous that in that single F1 race, Enzo Ferrari himself famously didn't allow his drivers to participate in the Grand Prix out of fear for his driver's own safety. Remember, this is at a time where deaths in motorsport were common, so for Enzo Ferrari, a man not known for any compassion, to not allow his drivers to participate just goes to show how dangerous Pescara really was. Anyway, the circuit consists of a mixture of long streets cutting through towns and cities, and small quiet roads in the Italian countryside. A lap of the circuit would start in the city of Pescara on long straight roads, before heading right into the countryside on narrow country roads that look more fit for a rally stage than F1. The winding ribbon of tarmac continues through fields and villages with nothing to ensure your safety, other than the odd bush, hay bale, or if you're unlucky, a brick wall. After all these bumpy and twisty corners comes a massive straight nicknamed the Flying Kilometre to bring cars from the countryside back into the city. Also, the Flying Kilometre is a pretty misleading name because in reality it was much longer than that. To put into context just how long this straight was, this straight alone is about the same length as the whole circuit of the Americas at just over 3.4 miles. After this is a 90-degree corner at the town of Montesilvano, and after that straight I can only imagine how terrifying it would be to have a brake failure into that corner. You miss your braking zone into here and you'll almost definitely be taking a trip into the ocean. Anyway, this corner leads on to another massive straight before being interrupted by a chicane just before the pit lane. Funnily enough, although this video is about how dangerous the circuit is, it was the first ever circuit in F1 to use the safety concept of artificial chicanes to reduce top speed. Although this track was only ever used once in F1, it had been the host for a non-championship race ever since 1924. And in 1934, it was decided to create this chicane here to slow the cars down when coming into the pit lane after going at top speed for over 3 miles. So after this chicane, the drivers would come back onto the start-finish straight, and there you go, one lap of Pescara completed. Anyway, let's get on to that single F1 Grand Prix held there in 1957, simply titled as the Pescara Grand Prix. The inclusion of Pescara on the 1957 calendar almost didn't happen at all. At the last second, the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa and the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort were suddenly cancelled, leaving room for other Grand Prix to take their places. Pescara was chosen as it had been a non-championship F1 race in the past, and it would also mark the first time one country would hold 2 or more Grand Prix in the same season, being the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, and of course this Pescara Grand Prix at, well, Pescara. So in this single F1 event held here in 1957, Pole position was a daunting 9 minutes and 44 seconds set by Juan Manuel Fangio in his Maserati. Nowadays, the gap between any two drivers in qualifying is rarely over a second, but qualifying at Pescara, most drivers were upwards of 10 seconds apart from each other, with the gap between first place Fangio and last place Jack Brabham being almost 2 whole minutes apart. The next day, the race would be 18 laps long for a total of 288 miles, which for reference is just under 100 miles longer than any modern F1 race. The Grand Prix was eventually won by the late Sir Stirling Moss, with Juan Manuel Fangio and his teammate Harry Schell taking second and third. For the next 2 years after its race in the F1 Championship, the track lay completely dormant as the Pescara Grand Prix was cancelled in 1958 and 59. Pescara's penultimate race in 1960 would be a Formula Junior race won by future F1 champion Denny Hulme, and Pescara's final race would come in 1961 in the form of a 4-hour endurance race as a part of the 1961 World Sports Car Championship. After that race, the Pescara circuit was completely abandoned as a result of officials not being able to guarantee the safety of both the spectators and the drivers due to the sheer length of the circuit. To this day, the circuit remains as public roads as it always has, so if you're ever in Italy, why not take a lap of the circuit just to get a taste of what it must have been like all those years ago. Throughout this video, I've strayed further and further from the topic at hand here. Why is this the most dangerous F1 track of all time? Well, to summarise, point 1, there was little to no crash barriers around the circuit, other than the occasional hay bale to soften an impact. Point 2, all of this part here may as well have been a rally stage, as the track was incredibly narrow and bumpy, leaving little room for mistakes. Point 3, the lack of guardrails meant drivers were in constant danger of hitting anything from a tree when in the countryside sections or a lamppost when in the city. And point 4, the factor that in my opinion makes it more dangerous than other circuits of the time is obviously just how long it is. It suffers the same problem that led to the downfall of the Nürburgring Nordschleife in F1. The length of the circuit means medical staff and marshals are more spread out across the track, and probably not there at all in some parts. This was in the 50s, remember, so communication from one end of the track to another would be much more lacking than it is today. For example, let's say somebody crashed and was burning alive in their cockpit in the countryside section of the track. It would take a lot longer for medical staff to be notified and be on their way to help the driver due to the sheer size of the circuit. People on the other side of the circuit would have no idea there had been a crash, simply due to a lack of communication around the track. Case in point, during the infamous Le Mans disaster that happened just a couple years before, people positioned at the other side of the circuit at the Mulsanne Straight were completely oblivious to the fact that over 80 people just died at the same venue. With more modern technology able to ensure quicker communication between the scene of an accident and the required marshals and medical team, it probably wouldn't be any more dangerous than any other of the crazy circuits used back in the 50s. So there you go, that's why I believe Pescara circuit to be the most dangerous circuit in the history of F1. I mean, if someone like Enzo Ferrari deems the circuit too dangerous, chances are it probably is. As I said at the start of this video, F1 track design has come a long way. Obviously F1 cars of today could never even come the slightest bit close to racing at Pescara. The track was so thin that modern F1 cars would take up the entire road, and I don't even want to imagine the DRS zones on those two massive straights. Safety in F1 has always been evolving, and even though we don't like super safe circuits with huge runoffs like Paul Ricard and Yas Marina, it's ultimately for the better of the sport. Also, before I end off this video, just to get a better idea of the circuit, I highly recommend this video by YouTuber Nicholas Soto, in which he drives a 97 Benetton around Pescara in R-Factor. Obviously, the Pescara in R-Factor isn't a one-to-one representation of what the real circuit was like, but you can still get a good idea of how it must have been. But anyway guys, that's it for this video on Pescara. Hopefully this is the first video of my new series where I talk about the history of motorsport. If you have any suggestions for upcoming videos, please leave them down in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you all next week for another video.